Kirk says, is there any link between heavy prowler push to increase top end leg strength and time under tension? Or is it primarily programmed with the objective of increasing leg conditioning and sustained output capacity? Really good question. Using the prowler, and to understand our use of the prowler, we need to understand a little bit about the mechanics of muscle contractions. We've talked about this before, but it's worth revisiting. 3 types of contractions. You can have a concentric contraction where your muscles are shortening. You can have an eccentric contraction where your muscles are lengthening and breaking a load. And then you can have an isometric contraction where your muscles are staying still and maintaining a joint position. The best form of contraction to create strength and hypertrophy, to increase that cross-sectional area of a muscle, is an eccentric contraction. In the eccentric contraction, we create a lot of muscle damage, a lot of these small micro tears in the muscles, which then force our body to respond by increasing protein synthesis and laying down more muscle. Now, using a prowler, we don't get these eccentric contractions, and this can be both a positive and a negative. So let's unpack this a little bit and work out why. Because you don't have these eccentric contractions with a prowler, because there's no braking action, there's no slowing down the movement of the load, you're not causing these micro tears in the muscles, therefore you're not in an optimal state to generate strength. However, this can also be a positive. Having only a concentric contraction means that you're actually able to generate some strength and generate some power with a lot less of those short-term negatives. These acute changes in muscle chemistry caused by these micro tears and caused by inflammation. So you're not getting the same degree of soreness. Now, of course, soreness can be a good sign that we have created some favorable muscle damage here, but there can be times when it's good not to create that muscle damage. So if you're looking at a population of exercisers who like to train a lot, they like to do a lot of training, and you're struggling to get them training less, you can actually have more bouts of training using a prowler without as much long-term damage, and there's much less of a chance of overtraining. So we're actually able to train for longer, and you're able to train with more frequent bouts of exercise. A lot of the best research that's come out on using the prowler will actually show that 3 hours post-training, all these muscle markers are starting to return to normal. So you're looking at almost a full recovery after just 3 hours. So for people who are training multiple times a day, this can be an effective method and an effective mode of exercise to be using. If you're using this earlier in the day in your first training session, you're still able to then work very hard in the second part of the day. If you're using this in the second part of the day, you'll absolutely have full recovery for the next day's training. But the advice here based on this research is that using the prowler in part 1 of your training session, maybe in your AM training, can be a really good strategy, because then you have full recovery 3 hours later when you go into part 2, and you can even strength train then and not have too many negative effects of that first piece of training. Now, even though we're getting these changes and these recoveries in your muscles in that short amount of time, it's actually been shown that 24 hours post-training, you still have elevated levels of testosterone in the body and elevated levels of growth hormone. So from the point of view of having this time under tension causing some sort of chemical or hormonal change in the body, which puts you in a state conducive to improving muscle strength and size, there is an argument to say, yes, this is an effective way to do this. You're still getting some of these positives, that being these hormonal changes, while you're starting to minimize some of these negatives, or things that could be perceived as negatives for people who are looking to train across multiple areas of fitness and look at multiple bouts. So really good for people who have a fixation on training a lot, and as you're working on changing that psychology that more is better, this is a great tool to be able to work with that psychology and meet an athlete where they are. Another real good benefit of working with a prowler is that there's very little technique needed. It's very hard to do this movement incorrectly. And if you do it incorrectly, it results more in a loss of efficiency and in a loss of effect, as opposed to doing something like a heavy back squat incorrectly, which can cause a lot more long-term overuse or acute and chronic issues in the body. So very hard to do it incorrectly, so extremely low injury rates with a movement like this. Talking about injury, this is a great tool to use for people who are injured, to be able to replace some of their standard training and the standard stimuli with a less injurious or an easier on the body form of exercise. And this is because we don't have the eccentric muscle damage. So for people who are suffering from some sort of soft tissue injury, be it a muscular, a ligament or a tendon-based injury, this can be a really effective way because it still allows your muscles to recover from the injury itself, and you're not placing too much more muscle damage and therefore too much more stress and stimulus that your body is having to recover from. From a joint point of view, if it's more of a musculoskeletal type issue, again, very low impact, you're not loading the joints too much, and there's a shorter range of motion, which means that you're able to avoid those injurious ranges in the muscle. So how do we do this? What does the actual practical application of this change look like? Well, if you're looking to substitute something that's quite anterior chain dominant, so let's say you're trying to substitute for a front squat for an athlete who has knee issues. What you will then do is something with the Prowler or with a sled where you are moving backwards. So either with a strap around your waist where you're dragging you walking backwards and you're facing the sled or Prowler, or holding on to handles and again walking backwards. That will be an anterior chain dominant movement as a substitute for something like a front squat. If you're looking to substitute for something that's more posterior chain dominant, maybe a deadlift. So let's say we have an athlete with a lower back issue and we are looking to not do deadlifts and replace it with work on the sled or Prowler. We would be looking at some sort of forward push or forward drag. So either using low handles on the Prowler, pushing it forward, or walking forward with your back to the Prowler, so you're moving forward again with a strap around your waist or holding the rings out behind you. So to answer your question, is this as powerful for creating strength as doing something with eccentric loading? In one bout of exercise, the answer is no. It's not going to have the same effect. If you do 10 minutes of strength training working on squats, 10 minutes of strength training working on the Prowler, the squats will give you a lot more benefit. However, there are other confounding variables in there, like the time taken to recover and the benefit for people who are injured, and also this fact that you still get these changes in hormone levels 24 hours post-exercise. So my advice would be to incorporate both elements into your training. They both play a part as long as you're using them both where they're most effective.